about a couple of techniques. The first one is called parts integration. Parts integration is one of the most important techniques of NLP. I would catalog as the most important technique of NLP, outside of timeline therapy that is the one that I use a lot. And in a moment together we will see why. I can't say I use it every day, but I use it very often on myself, and also when I work with clients that have particularly difficult conflicts at the unconscious level. So let me ask you a question, and this is the question I want you to consider. How many times were you faced with making a decision in life? Something you wanted to do, you felt like doing, but at the same time, it was something that told you, no, it's too hard, or I can't, or I don't know if I could, or and at the same time, you wanted to. It was like, I wish I could do that, but you felt you couldn't. And then the result was that you made no decision, you took no decision, and 1 year later, 2 years later, 6 months later, maybe 2 months later, you were still in the same place, and you still didn't make any decision. And you felt like you're stuck. Now, in the utmost extreme cases, I met clients that were in this situation of conflicts, and they felt like their life dreams go by. Oh, I could have done this, and I could have done that, but I didn't. But I could have done the other one, but I couldn't. But I could change my job, then I could have had an opportunity, but I didn't feel like I didn't feel like I could. Like I didn't feel like I was good enough, or I didn't feel like I was scared, or I was whatever. And then these people, most of them we see as clients, end up in a place where they feel blah, they feel blasé, they feel despondent, they feel, they get into a state of why bother? Why bother with anything? And so they become placid. And in time they become cynical. And they also, some of them, become even resentful because they see other people that go for what they want and they go, I could have, but I didn't. And then they become resentful. And then life passes by them and they are still stuck in this place. And it almost, to me, it almost looks like they give up on life. How many times did it happen to you that your heart said something? You felt for something really, really hard. And your mind says, no. And then it gave you all the good reasons why you couldn't have that, whatever it was. Or you couldn't go for it. Or you couldn't take that action. And so you experienced what we call normally heart versus mind conflict. How many times did it happen to you to worry about your finances, running out of money in the future, or what are you going to do financially? When you said to yourself, I should do something. I should do something to be more sure of my future, to be more safe, to know for sure that I'm going to be okay in the future. But then you couldn't decide what to do. You didn't know what to do. Maybe there are options out there, but you could not make up your mind which way to go. How many times you felt conflicted? Shall I stay in this relationship or go? How many times you felt conflicted between this job or another job? Shall I stay in this job? It's safe, it's secure. I don't like it. I hate it. It's just boring. Same thing the same. I don't have an opportunity to grow and further develop and progress. But it gives me the money. I pay the mortgage. But I really would like to do something else. Oh, look at this job over there. Oh, if I could only do it. But I don't think I can. On one hand, you said to yourself, I know this situation, relationship, job, whatever it is, I know it well. I know it well. I put up with all the stuff that goes on there. On the other hand, oh boy, I would really want something better. I would really want something happier. I would really want something more fulfilling in my life. How many times you said in relation to a person who misbehaved toward you, I'm not going to take this anymore. Next time I'm going to say something about it. only to find yourself that you do the same thing again. And then you said, wow, I in that moment I really thought I'm gonna change my ways, but you didn't. How many times you felt torn between two possible directions, and how much energy it cost you? How much energy, if you ever experienced conflicts in your life, and by the way, most everybody has. I should even take the word most out of there, because the difference between people who say yes and the people who say no is just the level of awareness. We all experience conflicts at some point or another in our life, inner conflicts, that is. I'm talking about inner conflicts here. And how much energy does it cost us to think, oh, this or that? Oh, I want to do this, but I don't think I can. And the thoughts are rambling in your head, and you feel like torn between these two things. On one hand this, on the other hand that, and you don't know. And it takes so much energy, doesn't it? So the question then remains, what would it be worth to you to get rid of all the conflicts? What it would be worth to you to be able to decide easily and clearly to make the best decision without, back and forth, rambling on all sorts of thoughts inside our head and running out of energy or getting blasé or feeling stuck or not being able to move. What would it be worth to you to learn how to do this? For me, it was worth a lot, I'm telling you. When I took my practitioner training, and especially when I took my master practitioner training, and I experienced what parts integration does, I loved it so much that I started, this is just sharing, yeah? Sharing my own experience. You don't have to repeat what I've done. After I learned how to do parts integration in the training really well and I experienced the exercises, I became really good at it. And I loved it so much, I started searching in my unconscious mind for all possible parts that I had previously there. And I started integrating part after part after part after part. And I integrated, I think, just upwards of 100 parts. Smaller little parts or bigger parts or medium parts or all sorts of things that I have created in time. And I loved it so much, but after all this exercise, first of all, I became really good at parts integration. I became really good at parts integration. But also, aside from that, I became very congruent, extremely congruent. I didn't have doubts. I didn't have, oh, I wished it, but I don't know if I can. I back and forth, ideas inside my head, thoughts, conflicting ideas and patterns. No, none of that completely disappeared. So, that being said, let's see what is actually, what is this parts integration thing that we're talking about? Let's state what to me is the obvious. Parts integration is the most in-depth intervention from the NLP part, but we also have added to the original parts integration as it's been developed in NLP, we have added a lot of extra understanding and a lot of extra steps that will make it a very, very in-depth intervention. We also teach it during the timeline therapy section of our trainings because it's an extremely important technique, so pay attention now. So let's talk a little bit about parts. Parts are part of the unconscious mind. I think we can safely say that a part is simply a part of the unconscious mind. Funny story that Ted shared with us in the training was that when he took his NLP practitioner training, he asked the person who was training him, he said, well, what is a part? And the answer he got is, shut up and keep going. So that put Ted on a path of asking himself and beginning to think about this notion of parts at the unconscious level. So you need to think a bit. You think a bit. You think a bit about it because where they lie at the unconscious level, that means they operate outside of our conscious awareness. So how do they work? How do they do this? So let's look at page 13 in the slide set, in the back of the book, and let's look at slide number 75. You notice it says parts and there is a diagram. Now imagine for a moment that slide is totally blank. It's nothing on it. And let's make a parallel. Let's imagine that that totally blank slide would be your unconscious mind before any parts. It's your unconscious mind prior to any experience, prior to any, shall we say, disintegration. Now what happens is, oftentimes there is a part which is formed in the unconscious mind. And a part is actually a part of the nervous system which is part of the unconscious mind, but which has become functionally detached. Now, in this context, the word functional means software. It's your software on your computer. Yeah? So it's become functionally detached from the rest of the unconscious mind. So let's assume that some communication, which was supposed to begin at the lower left, where that little arrow says communication, and it moves straight. Yeah? Originally, that communication perhaps was intended to move straight through, as we see, but if it bumps into that part and it takes a right turn, it gets that dash line, yeah? It moves off in a different direction that doesn't fully go through the nervous system easily or very cleanly. So, therefore, we can say that a part represents some sort of a functional blockage. It's a functional blockage that it's been superimposed on the nervous system and which interferes with the flow of information through the neural network pathways. So information which is supposed to flow smoothly through the neural nets is going to be jammed up by a part, is going to be gummed up. It won't flow through the neural network smoothly. As you remember, the information has to travel through your body. It starts from the central part of the brain, from the cortex, and it's directed through the body. And if you have these blockages, we can imagine them as little black bags of blockages, neurological blockages. The information cannot possibly travel correctly as it was intended. So, in essence, parts integration should remove the blockages in the nervous system and allow the neural network information to flow smoothly as it was intended through the neural networks. Now, that would be pretty exciting, because what that means is that parts integration will actually improve our physiological energy, our psychological health, and which, of course, if you, as I mentioned before, if you ever had a really good parts integration done with you, it really does do that. It really takes and moves the energy through you and begins to make it so that it begins to move freely and smoothly through. All that energy that was gummed up into the conflict and kept at bay there is now free and moves through your body. It's an absolutely amazing feeling of, if you will, some people describe it as a weight being taken off their shoulders. Some people said that inner fight that was there, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, is not there anymore. Some people describe it as absolute lightening up of the whole body and mind and spirit. They feel lighter. They feel freer. Yeah. So to backtrack, what we're saying is that the part is a part of the unconscious mind. Yeah. It's become functionally detached from the rest of the nervous system. It blocks up the flow of neural network information. Now, the interesting thing is that a part always has a certain behavior that part produces. And usually, if the part is a part of the presenting problem, that behavior which the part is producing, the client doesn't like it very much. Yeah? So it's part of the presenting problem of the client, and in that sense, it's something the client would like to get rid of. Would like to just, I don't want to do this anymore. Or the client will say probably to you, gee, I just don't want that sort of a thing anymore, because I feel like when this part takes over, it's almost like I'm behaving like it's not me. There are people who give us the feedback that when they really kick into a part, they behave like there is another person, like it's not them. So our people say sometimes, I just don't want to feel that certain whatever I'm feeling, anymore. I'm not going to give specific examples, but you figure out it's something they don't want to feel anymore. And can you imagine these parts themselves often even can have their own values and belief systems? And definitely because they are detached, you see, they're separated from the rest of the unconscious mind, they also have their own functional approach to life. So therefore, oftentimes when a person pops into a part on where the part gets activated, it's tough for the person to get out of it. So that person acts in that way for a lot longer than they'd like to, or maybe they don't like it at all. So there's a lot of problems when a person experiences inner conflicts and parts. Yeah? So a part which is brand new, a part that's been just formed recently, will have the client being able to get out of it a lot more easily than a part which the client's been doing for a very long time. A part which has been part of the client for a very long time, the client may find it harder and harder to get out of, because the more the client does it, the more the client does that behavior in that way, working within that part, the more the client's going to activate those neural networks that create the part, and they are going to get really entrenched and almost solidified, not really, but metaphorically solidified in the neurology, as it were. So parts integration is very valuable for undoing that sort of thing, regardless for how long the client had the conflict. Yeah. So here's something else about parts integration that I think it's really important to discuss. The more parts we've got at the unconscious level, the more chances are there for incongruency. Just think of this. You have one person at the command of your central nervous system. Or you have 25 people who are fighting for the same position, fighting with each other at the command of your nervous system. Where do you think it's going to be more congruency? Obviously with one person. Even 2-3 people are better than 25. When you have 25 people who are fighting, oh boy, it's pretty busy in there, and not all behavior produced will be purposeful, fulfilling, satisfying, or even happy. So if you remember what we discussed during the first CDs where we discussed the presuppositions of NLP, one of the presuppositions of NLP on page 12 says that all procedures should increase wholeness. In that sense, parts, the presence of parts at the unconscious level decrease wholeness. Anytime we have a part at the unconscious level, we're going to have the possibility of increased conflict. Too many people, everyone has their own ideas, we're going to have conflict. Yeah? Anytime there is a possibility of increased conflict, we have a decrease of congruency in the person. And you have seen people who are totally incongruent. They say yes, and their head moves signaling no. They say something, and they do something else. Then they say it again differently, and they do something else again. And then you wonder which one's the truth and which ones are all lies. But it's not necessarily that they are lies. People who have a lot of inner conflicts and who pop from one part to another can create all sorts of conflicting behaviors. And they look from the outside like they are terribly incongruent. Therefore, for you personally, and also as a practitioner in NLP, your clients, if you do this procedure with them, they will get rid of incongruency. Wouldn't that make them feel absolutely fantastic? I bet you that would. And you would look absolutely incredible, like an absolute genius for assisting them to get rid of this incongruency. So that's what we're going to learn in parts integration, and that's what parts integration is about. It's about getting rid of any incongruency at the unconscious level, and it's also about being able to take and smooth out those wrinkles, as it were, Smooth out the wrinkles of incongruency, smooth out the incongruent behavior. If you have a manager, think if you have or you are a manager or a salesperson, and they say, I'm incongruent, and people pointed out to me. Everybody seems to know that I'm incongruent. Dad had a couple of clients like this. I had a couple of clients like this. And definitely for them, parts integration is absolutely the answer. A client who says to you, I feel like I could do this, but I could also do that. Parts integration is the answer. The client says, I don't know which way to turn. I can't choose. Parts integration is the answer. The client says, I know I should do something for my financial safety in the future, but I'm not sure if I could do this or that. I can't make up my mind. Parts integration is the answer. A person comes to you and says, I don't know if I should get into this relationship with this man or woman or that man or woman. Parts integration is the answer. By the way, we don't think you should ever give advice of what people should do. Let them make up their own mind. But you see, it's hard to make up your own mind if you're conflicted. You can make up your mind only after you integrate the conflicts. So for all of these instances and examples, parts integration is definitely the answer. Parts integration is the answer for a lot of things that involve anytime, let's make a generalization. Anytime you have conflict at the unconscious level, you will automatically do parts integration. It will increase congruency, it will increase power of decision, it will increase capability to make choices wisely. I think most people I talk to would like to be more congruent, would like to be more aligned inside themselves, would like to really feel inside themselves that alignment and wholeness that we all unconsciously and consciously seek. And parts integration is absolutely and totally about that. Since we're here on page 13 on the slides, so slide page 13, and the wall chart is number 76, and we look here at the diagram, it says parts integration, and it's got a line with an X and an Y, and an A and a B. Now, if you assume that X and Y are the full range of what your nervous system is capable, and see what it says 0 on one side and then infinity on the other side? So assuming the nervous system is fully capable of doing all the way from X to Y, although probably will never quite reach infinity and probably never quite reach 0, but let's assume for a moment that we've picked up the full range of which the nervous system is capable. Then we integrate two parts at A and B. Notice that A and B are fairly close together. Therefore, we will not get a wide integration or as deep integration or as profound integration if we get two parts which we integrate at a wider distance like X and Y. Therefore, we want to do our best to define the parts, and we're going to learn in a moment how to do that. We're going to learn how to define the parts so that we involve very separated X and Y distance in the neurology, because that integration involves a far deeper process, and it's going to pull in more neural networks, and it's going to bring more profound integration of the pairs of opposites at the unconscious level. And we absolutely are we are interested in that, absolutely. Okay, now let's turn to page 73 in the manual, and the page title is Parts Integration. Before we begin, we need to recognize when do we have a part. Sometimes a client will utter a sentence that will be the description of the part, but the words themselves could, I'm saying the word could, sound like a limiting decision. And then how do we recognize whether we are working with a part or we're working with a limiting decision? Because if we're working with a limiting decision, then obviously we won't do parts integration, we will do timeline therapy, the limiting decision process, and we would get rid of the limiting decision or the limiting belief, because it's the same process for both. But if we have a part, obviously we won't do timeline therapy. We will do the process of parts integration, and we would get rid of that part. In other words, we won't get rid of it in terms of eliminating it. We will integrate it. So as you will see, all the positive parts of the part will be retained, and the unuseful conflicted behavior will be reintegrated into the wholeness of the body. So let's say that somebody says, I don't feel good enough. Okay, that could sound like a limiting belief or a limiting decision, right? In and of itself. Now, let's see how we define if it's a part or not, how we figure it out. A part operates part-time. Remember this, you can even make a note if you want. A part operates part-time, or, I said the word or, it's a full-time conflict. So in our example of I don't feel good enough, you ask the client, do you feel that you are not good enough all the time? Or are there times when you feel good enough? Now, the client either says, all the time, I feel like I'm not good enough. Now, if the client says all the time, you're not having a part. You are having a limiting decision. Because a limiting decision, make a note of this too, operates full-time, and, I didn't say the word or, I said the word and, it is congruent. So I'll repeat, a part operates part-time or is a full-time conflict, and a limiting decision operates full-time and it is congruent. So if the client says, I don't feel good enough all the time, that's full-time, right? It's not part-time, it's full-time. The client says all the time. And it's congruent. All the time I feel like I'm not good enough. So obviously, in this instance, we would have a limiting decision, and then we know we go do timeline therapy to assist the client in coaching. But if the client says, let's repeat what you would ask. You would ask the client, so you said you don't feel good enough. Is that all the time, or are there times when you feel good enough? The client may answer, now we're going to take the other example. No, there are times when I feel quite good and I feel like I'm good enough for what I'm doing, but at some other times I don't feel like I'm good enough. Now notice that there are sometimes like this, sometimes like that. It's obviously part-time. It's not a full-time job the part is doing. It's a part-time job, that's why it's a part. Or the client may say the following. Pay attention, this is the other possibility. I'm permanently conflicted whether I'm good enough or not. So I have a full-time conflict. All the time I'm conflicted. I don't know, I'm good enough or not. I'm permanently conflicted. It doesn't give me a break. I'm always conflicted whether I'm good enough or not. In those instances, we have a part-time or a full-time conflict, in which case we know that we're dealing with a part, so that's the parts integration is the intervention in the situation. Good. Now let's see how to do it. Let's look at page 73. At number 1 it says, the first thing you want to do when you do parts integration, you want to identify the parts and the conflict involved. So I'm going to read now. Identify the conflict and the parts involved. Make sure you clearly identify the parts clearly and understand the nature of the conflict. I cannot emphasize how important point number 1 is. You may be tempted to skip very quickly over number 1, but if you don't define the parts correctly and you don't understand the parts correctly, your client will not understand at all. Because if the client understood this problem, the client could resolve his problem on his or on her own. But if you don't understand that what the parts are specifically, what are you doing? So in order to understand the conflict, when the client gives you the statement that defines the conflict, first of all, you need to take notes. You need to write it down word for word. in client's words. Do not redefine it for the client. Do not write it in your own words. Do not suggest to the client anything. Just write down what the client tells you. And if you don't understand the conflict, do not proceed. Anytime you don't understand how the problem's a problem, you will ask the following question. How is that a problem? Now that's a bizarre question. Notice that you didn't ask why, you didn't ask what, you didn't ask any when, you asked how is that a problem? And sometimes for people, they don't even compute the answer to this question. It's a very unusual question, and yet it will give you the information of how's the client doing it inside their heads. Here is an absolutely phenomenal example, which is through time it remains the best example possible for learning purposes. In one of the trainings, a person in the training, a course participant, a woman raised her hand and said, I've got a conflict. I said, okay, what's the conflict? She volunteered to be a demonstration subject. And she said, I've got 2 houses and I am conflicted because I don't know in which one to live. Now, honestly, if I had 2 houses, I would figure something out. I mean, I could see how it's a problem if you don't have a house, you don't have where to live. But if you have 2 houses, okay, rent one and live in the other one, or live in one on the Monday to Friday and go on the other one on the weekend, or live in one on spring and in the summer go in the other one. I don't know. And yet, looking across at this woman, she sincerely had a problem. She sincerely had a conflict. But you see, we couldn't understand how is that a problem. We didn't proceed, so we asked her the question, how is that a problem? And she thought of it for a moment, and she said, you know, part of me believes that I can't have what I want. Wow. Here we started for 2 houses, and untrained practitioners or people who don't understand parts integration would have rushed to put one house on one palm, the other house on the other palm, and integrate the 2 houses. So putting a house on one palm and the other house on the other palm, it's not going to do it. I mean, it's going to integrate something, probably. Most likely it could get rid of the conflict between 2 houses. But was that the real conflict? You see, that wasn't really what the inner conflict was all about. Was, you know, part of me doesn't believe I can have what I want, or believes that I can't have what I want. Now that's a real problem if it's a part like this, because it will affect more than one area of life. It will go actually cross-contextual. So therefore, we asked her afterwards, so is that what you're saying, that it is a part of you that says it's not okay for you to have what you want? She said, yeah, there is, absolutely. Was that, is there operating part-time, or are there times when you think you can have what you want? And she says, no, it's not. It's just part-time. It's sometimes I believe I can have what I want, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's not. And at the same time, looking at her physiology, her palms were showing, you know, on one hand this and on the other hand this. So physiologically, she also showed us that actually she had a serious inner conflict. So that's important. And that's all at number 1, identify the conflict and the parts involved. So make sure you clearly identify the parts clearly. The word clearly is very important there. That's why it's twice. And understand the nature of the conflict. You, the practitioner, need to understand what's the nature of that conflict for the client. So anyway, in our example, we identified the part. So now we have to move to number 2, which says, have the part which represents the unwanted state or behavior come out on the hand first. I wonder if I can talk to this part. This is what you say to the client. I wonder if I can talk to this part. Which hand would it like to come out and stand on? Let the client tell you if it's right or left hand, just because you want congruency. It doesn't really matter on which palm the part comes out. However, for the client's congruency, that's important. So the client will show you right or left hand. Please note that we don't have two parts at this point. We have just one part. We're talking only with the part that has the problem so far. Good, then we move to number 3. Make sure that the client has a VAK, so visual auditory kinesthetic image of the part as it comes out on the hand. And you say to the client the following words. Who does this part look like? Does it look like someone you know? The client says yes or no. Then you ask, does it sound like someone you know? Allow the client to answer. And then you say, does it feel like someone you know? So you are running through the 3 major modalities. And the question, who, would like to suggest to the client to personalize the part. This is an important point. Human beings talk inside their heads with other human beings. We all had conversations with other people inside our heads, imaginary conversations, right? But we don't really talk inside our heads with a big black blob of guck, right? Or with a big blue fluffy ball. Or with the table in front of you, high table. Now we're going to have a conversation. How's it going today? Do you have a problem? No, we don't do these kind of things. I know it sounds ridiculous, isn't it? So, therefore, the languaging of this question, who does this part look like, presupposes somebody, a person. Now, could it be somebody the person knows in their close environment? Could it be themselves? Could it be, I don't know, Darth Vader or, Superman or whatever? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Whatever the client's unconscious mind answers, we go with that. So now, after number 3, what do we have? We have a part. We know what the problem is. What's the part's problem? We also have personalized the part, and we have a visual auditory kinesthetic image of that part on that palm. Now we move to number 4. Number 4 says, elicit the opposite number to come out on the other hand. And this is what you say to the client. I'd like to talk to the part with which this part is most in conflict. The flip side of the coin, the opposite number. And let's have it come out and stand on the other hand. Now, please note that we, the practitioners, did not and do not define the other part for the client. The languaging at number 4 is very precise. If you make up your own language, you're on your own. The languaging here is very precise. So what are we asking for? We're asking for the part with which this one we know, part that we have it on the palm already, we know it has a problem. We have defined the problem, we're sure it has a problem. Now we want exactly the 180 degrees opposed. The part with which this one has the most conflict. That's why we say the opposite number, the flip side of the coin. The part with which this one is most in conflict. We don't specifically name it. We let the client do it for us. There is no need for more specificity. If you understand the process of parts integration, you'll understand that we're not going towards specificity. Actually, through everything we're doing, we're suggesting more abstraction, going towards higher chunk. And you'll see that in a moment. So, the other part comes on the other palm. Then we do number 5. Again, we make sure the client has a VAK image of that part as it comes out on the other hand. And we ask the same question. Who does this part look like? Does it look like someone you know? Does it sound like someone you know? Does it feel like someone you know? Good, at this point, well, after the client tells us, we now have the two parts we work with. Up to this point in time, it's all correct, set up. Now we have two parts. The part with the problem, which is the first one, and the part with which the first one is most in conflict. And now we go at number 6, we begin to separate the intention from behavior. Good, so here at number 6, where we separate intention from behavior, before we read through this, I'd like to jump over to slide page 14, please. Because I want you to look very carefully at slide number 79 on slide page 14. Now you see where it says there parts integration. So in the middle, we have that circular shaded part is the part itself. It's a representation, a two-dimensional representation of the part itself. And that part has a certain behavior at the lowest level. The part also has a certain intention at the highest level if you look carefully. Intention is up there. Now this is really important from the point of view of our procedure and from the point of view of the philosophy of parts integration, so make sure you understand it really well. You need to understand at this point that the highest intention of a part is never the intention of the whole. Because if it was the intention of the whole, we would not have a part. We would have the whole. So epistemologically, which means thinking about thinking, yeah? A part cannot possibly be the whole and have the intention of the whole. Because if it did have the intention of the whole, it would be the whole. It would not be a part anymore. So a part, generally, has the highest intention, which is different from the lower level behavior and the intention inside the part. Meaning the intention which is contained inside the boundaries of the part. So what we're going to do at number 6, we're going to assist the client to chunk up at higher levels of abstraction by asking them 2 questions: for what purpose, or what's the intention, and they move to higher levels of abstraction level by level, and those are the little horizontal lines that you see in the diagram. They indicate higher levels of intention and higher levels of intention and higher levels of intention. And at some point, what's going to happen, the client's going to chunk up until they will hit the boundaries, the line, the boundaries of the part. Now, when they hit the boundaries of the part, the normal tendency of many people, I'm not saying everybody, so not everybody does this, but many people do. The moment they chunk up to the boundaries of the part, they'll have a tendency to loop further, to loop back down inside the part. Here is a metaphor so you can imagine this. Imagine you want to build a bridge over a deep ravine. Deep ravine being the boundary, the neurological boundary of the part. And you're going up to there and you go, that's it, I can't go any further. But you're not looking across, you're looking only down. So you see, okay, I can walk up to here, I can walk up to here. Oh, I can't walk anymore. That's it, I'm done. In the same way, many clients, when they hit the boundary, will say to you, that's it. That's the highest level intention. They may say this to you. I don't have anywhere else to go. That's it. That's the highest intention. Yes, that's the highest intention inside the part. But what you want to assist the client to do is to build that neurological bridge, metaphorically speaking, build that neurological bridge over the ravine so now they can step over and look further. That happens if you're patient and if you don't buy into the client telling you, oh, that's it, there is nothing more. The easiest way to spot when the client loops back inside the part is to look at the words you're writing down. You will be writing down. You can't do parts integration without writing down the words the client gives you. So, once you begin the process, you will write down every word the client gives you. And when the client loops back down inside the part, you will notice repeated words. Oh, I heard this word before. Oh, how low is it? Is it 1 level, logical level down? 2, 3, 4, more? Depending. Not everybody is the same. So as you write down the words, you will notice when the client loops back down. Now, keep in mind one thing. As you are actually asking the client the questions for chunking up, what the client's doing right there with you is building new neurological networks, new neurological connections that this client has not accessed before. Networks that the client, or connections that the client was unaware of, or just really had no utility or no access of prior to this moment. So you are going to ask the client to think differently, to chunk up and go outside the current range of behavior of which the part is capable. Don't get discouraged if the client may chunk back down and loop a couple of times. That's fine. Here is what you need to do when you notice loops. Let's say, for example, that you ask the client for what's the intention is or for what purpose, and the client says protection. Then you ask again for what protection, for what purpose, and the client says safety. You ask again safety for what purpose, and the client says freedom. Good. And you say, okay, freedom for what purpose, and the client says protection. And you keep going like this twice. You notice that the client went back down to protection, the second previous word. So the client has looped back down. If you do this a couple of times, then you group them all together, all the words that are contained inside the loop. And you will say the following. Okay, good. Protection and safety and freedom. All these together. For what purpose? What's the intention in having this? That's how you deal with loops when the client loops back down inside the part. Once the client goes beyond the boundaries of the part, by the way, folks, this is theory for the moment. This is just general theory. Yeah? Once the client goes beyond the boundaries of the part, you need to be patient because, as I said, the client's building new neurological connections while he's doing the process with you. But the moment the client steps over the boundaries of the part, you will notice a shift in the client. Either the hands will begin to tremor or come together, move together a little bit, or you may not notice a nice color shift in the client because the client will shift from sympathetic functioning into parasympathetic functioning. And the color in the face will increase, will become darker. The hands may warm up. The client will have a really nice integration at the end of the process. Because we'll switch on the healing process. They'll move into parasympathetic functioning. Okay, now let's turn back to page 73, please. And let's look at number 6 and unpack a little bit number 6 because there are a few things you need to pay attention to while you do number 6. This is the meat and potato of the whole parts integration. Number 6. So number 6 is separate intention from behavior. We discussed about this. Reframe each part so that they realize they actually have the same intention by chunking up. You will ask the following 2 questions. What is the intention of this part? Or this behavior or whatever the word the client gives you, for what purpose? In brackets here, this is something very important. You begin chunking up first with the part that has the unwanted state or behavior. As you do, make sure that the client's intention stays associated. If it does not say, what would that do for you? What would that make you feel? Let's talk about this bracketed paragraph here. There are 2 parts to it. First of all, begin chunking up first with the part that has the unwanted state or behavior. Now, that may seem obvious to some people, but You don't want to begin chunking up with the part that doesn't have the problem, as we discussed previously. Always begin chunking up first with the part that has the unwanted state or behavior. Second part of this bracketed paragraph that's important. Make sure that the client's intention stays associated. Here is what's happening. Sometimes, in the process of chunking up, before the client builds new neurological connections, the client will be tempted to give you, to jump outside of the boundaries of the part in a dissociated fashion. The moment, just remember this please, very important. The moment the client dissociates, the client jumps outside of the boundaries of the part, but not as you want them to chunk up, just jumps outside of the part. And if you miss that, and you chunk up, continue to chunk up outside of the boundaries of the part, somewhere on a lateral, tangential lateral direction, you will be chunking up to the moon and you won't succeed at the part's integration because you won't be operating with the part that's questionable. Yeah? You'll be outside of that. Now, how would you recognize dissociation? Well, very simple. Let's look at the bottom of the page 73. Note number 1 says, recognizing dissociation. 2 ways. 1, switch of referential index. It says, an example from me to others or from me to you. Let's take some examples so you're very, very clear how this works. It's actually simple. Sometimes people, when they communicate, they use the particle you, the pronoun you, instead of me. You know how it feels when this. Well, that's fine, but that means dissociation. So let's discuss our example. Let's say I ask the client, so what's the intention of this part? And the client says protection. And I say, protection for what purpose? And the client says, safety. And I say, safety for what purpose? And the client says, world peace. Okay, I am in favor of world peace, so is Ted. We are both totally in favor. In fact, we would do anything to contribute to world peace. And as good as world peace is not associated. It's a concept. The client, when it says to you a concept like this, the client's not associated. Or let me give you another example. So that's first of all a concept. Let me give you an example of referential index now. Protection for what purpose? Safety. Safety for what purpose? Well, you know how it feels when people feel free. It's freedom. Now, you know how it feels. It's already not associated anymore because the client didn't say freedom for me. I feel freedom. I get freedom. The client says, you know. So you is not I. It's not me. That makes it very easy for you to recognize this. The client says the particle you know that the client's dissociated. The client gives you concepts, ideas, you know the client's dissociated. The client may mention other people. Like here's a real example again. One client from a demonstration, once when I did a demonstration of parts integration, I don't remember exactly the words he gave me, but at some point he says, my corporation will be very happy with my work. Well, my corporation, the corporation itself is not me. The corporation, it will be happy. It's not I am happy. Do you understand? It's dissociation. It's others. And we don't want the client to give us others answers. Even if they say, my children would be great, my wife will be more happy because I'm at home, whatever, doesn't matter. It's others, it's other people. Others meaning other people or other entities. So there are just 3 things to recognize in dissociation. If the client says the word you, the client's dissociated. If the client mentions other people or other entities, like the corporation, for instance, or the business or whatever, the client's dissociated. If the client gives you concepts or ideas, the client's dissociated. Okay, Now we know, okay, the client's dissociated. Good. What do I do now? I recognize the client's dissociated. What do I do? Oh, well, it's not complicated at all. Look in the middle of number 6. It says there, if the client doesn't stay associated, you say the following question. What would that do for you? What would that make you feel? Let's take our example. Remember I said the client says protection. Protection for what purpose? Safety. Safety for what purpose? World peace. Now I recognize world peace is dissociated. I discard that word. I go back to the last word that the client used, associated, and I ask the client, good, so safety. What would safety do for you? What would that make you feel? So to backtrack for a second, I notice dissociation. I discard the word dissociated, the last word that's dissociated, or the last concept, or the switch or referential index. I go back to the last word the client gave me, which is associated, and I utilize that word in the question, what would that, insert here the word, do for you? What would that make you feel? Notice the predicate feel. The predicate feel is a kinesthetic predicate. It's put there on purpose. Because if the client really listens to the question and answers the question, being able to feel anything presupposes association. As we have learned already, you don't feel anything unless you are associated. If you are outside of your body and you're dissociated, you don't feel kinesthetic emotions. So that very question, what would that do for you? What would that make you feel? Will bring our client back associated. And you continue chunking up. We're talking just about the first part, folks, yet. We're not at the second part just yet. You continue chunking up until you are probably 4 or 5 levels above the boundaries of the part. Now, how would you know if the client goes beyond the boundaries of the part? Well, I already shared with you. You'll notice some sort of a shift. You may notice the hand with the part having little twitches or beginning to move toward the other hand, even if so slightly. Even if so slightly. You may notice a shift in color, a color change in the client's physiology. So there's this little shift that if you pay attention, and you will because you're going to look at the client, obviously, even if you write down the words, when you don't write down, you watch the client, you're going to notice when that happens. So you're going to go 4 or 5 levels beyond the boundaries of the first part. And then you're going to get to a very high chunk word. You have all the words written down. Once you get there, you're satisfied and you say, okay, now let's pay attention to the other part. And you do the same process as number 6 with the other part. So you're going to ask the other part, okay, this part now, the second part, what is the intention of this part? The client will give you words, and you chunk up the second part, making sure that both parts get to the same word as highest intention. So you want to chunk the second part up until it reaches the same word as highest intention as the first part. So obviously you're going to be several logical levels above the boundaries of the part. When that happens, what you will notice that the hands will begin moving together automatically. They may move together rather quickly, or they may move together rather slowly. We can't predict in advance whether for the person sitting in front of you, they'll move together quickly or slowly. So you want to keep an eye on the hands. And notice that number 6, we have A, B, and C. Steps A, B, and C. If you have time and if the hands move together slowly, you will do A, B, and C. If the hands move together rather rapidly, you may not have time to say them. If the hands really come together just so rapidly, you won't want to get the chance to say them. That's fine. Just allow the hands to come together. But if the hands come together rather slowly and you have time, you want to utilize numbers A, B, and C. Again, a little backtrack before we discuss A, B, and C. As the client chunks up the first part and goes beyond the boundaries of the part, the minute you notice a little tremor in the fingers or a little twitch or a little movement of the hand toward the other hand, tell the client, ask the client actually, did you notice that your hands are moving together? The client will either say yes or no. Most of the time the client says no. Whatever they say, ask them if they are doing that on purpose. Are you doing this on purpose? Or you're not doing that consciously, are you? Because the client is not. The client's busy with chunking up inside the part. But it becomes a real convincer for the client and for you, the practitioner, that something is actually on the good way and something positive is happening there. Something is happening at the unconscious level. So now let's look at A, B, and C. A says, now have the parts notice that they once part of a larger whole. Being chunked up to the higher level, this will become easy for the parts to notice, yeah, I'm actually not isolated, the little me, or separated from the rest. I was actually part of the larger whole from the beginning. Number B, ask for other parts that were also once part of the larger whole. If there are any, maybe there are, maybe they are not. So ask the client, are there any other parts that would like to join the integration? And have them join in the integration if there are other parts. And number C, it says what resource or attributes does each part have that the other part would like to have. As you write down the words of the client at number 6, you'll notice that there are a lot of positive, once it gets, the client chunks up several levels, you will notice that there are a lot of positive attributes and the positive resources that both parts have. And you want them to notice them. You want the client to notice that those resources and attributes are very important. So number C is actually a good contemplation from the client. And they can tell you out loud or they don't have to answer. Again, people are different here. If the hands come together slowly, if they come together fast and they are together already, don't worry about this. But if the hands come together slowly and you still have a little time, do number 7. And number 7 says, as the hands come together, give additional suggestions for integration. You can utilize some very nice suggestions that everything is integrated inside the client, and where we used to be opposition and conflict, now it's oneness and wholeness. But only if you have time. Be careful at your language here, be careful at your wording. If you do number 7. Step number 8, take the integrated parts inside and have it merge into the wholeness inside. By bringing the client brings the hands all the way to the chest area and brings metaphorically and symbolically the integrated part inside and have it merge into the wholeness inside. And when the client's ready, the hands will come down automatically. Break stay there and then test in future pace. Just test, ask the client, well, what was the problem? And the client may not even remember. If you do a really deep parts integration, the client may not even remember the part. Perfect. Don't remind them. It's good. It's gone. Let it be gone. It used to be a problem for the client. It's fine. Now, you need to future pace. So as you did before, have the client imagine a time in the future where they will be in a similar situation that used to give them trouble in the past because of the part that you just integrated, and have them notice how is it now different.
Hi again.
Welcome back. And Lori, this is a real parts integration, right?
Yes, it is.
And what's your presenting problem?
Well, as you know, I've been working on my hypnosis doctorate, and I'd like to really get going on it.
Okay. So there's something that prevents you from getting going on your hypnosis doctorate?
Yes, there's a part of me that has the drive and the self-motivation and the determination and discipline to get going. And then there's also a part of me that gets lazy and in my free time just wants to hang around and do nothing.
Okay, good. So there's a part of you that's actually not getting going or preventing you from getting going on your doctorate.
Right. I call that kind of like my lazy part.
Okay, so it's a part of you that's lazy.
Yes.
It's a part of you that's lazy, and that part just likes to hang around. So I wonder if I could talk to that part, and I wonder which hand that part would like to come out and stand on. Would it like to come out and stand on the right hand or the left hand?
On my right hand.
Okay, excellent. And would that part like to come out and stand right there? Okay, good. So does that part look like someone you know?
Yes, it looks like my grandmother, actually.
Oh, really? And does it sound like her?
Yeah, it kind of has a nagging little voice.
Oh, really? And it kind of feels like her there too, huh?
Yeah, it's kind of like she's making me do a chore and pointing her finger at me.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay, good. So this is the part that prevents you from doing your doctorate. Now, there's a part with which this part is most in conflict. The flip side of the coin, the opposite number. I wonder if that part would like to come out and stand on the other hand. And would it like to come out and stand on the back or the front of that hand?
The back.
Okay, so more toward the wrist there.
Middle, yeah.
Okay. And does that part look? What does that part look like? Does it look like someone you know?
This is yeah, it kind of looks like it represents me, but it doesn't quite look like me.
Okay. And this part, does it sound like you when it talks?
It's a more confident, self-actualized me.
Okay, good. All right. So I'd like to talk to the part of you that looks like your grandmother, the part of you that says it's not okay for you to go ahead and proceed and do the work on your doctorate easily. And I'd like to ask that part, what's its highest intention for this behavior of not proceeding? That is, the highest intention for being lazy and just hanging around the house.
Well, she's pointing her finger at me, nagging at me, and I'm asking her the highest intention of that, and it's to keep me reminded about things I should do.
Okay, so she wants to remind you about things that you should do.
Right.
Okay, and what is her purpose in that?
So I don't get lazy.
And if you're not lazy, what will that do for you?
Well, if I'm not lazy, then I won't get set back.
Okay, this is good. Now notice her pause there, not getting set back. So notice her pause there. Notice she had to pause for a moment and think about that. And so what will not getting set back do for you? What's its purpose in not wanting you to get set back? What's its highest intention for you?
Well, it'll always allow me to stay one step ahead of stay one step ahead of poverty.
Whoa, okay, great. And one step ahead of poverty, what's that going to do for you? This is a good part for you to integrate.
Yeah.
Notice these are tough questions for her if you can actually hear her thinking. These are tough questions for her because she really has to go inside and contemplate these. What's happening is she's actually making new neural networks as she does this, from thinking from inside the part. So one step ahead of poverty, what's that going to do for you?
It will allow me to break out of the mold.
And breaking out of the mold, what's the intention for that? If you break out of the mold, what will that do for you?
Like breaking out of the family mold for the purpose of becoming something bigger.
Uh-huh. And what will that do for you?
Becoming something bigger?
Yep.
Well, that will allow me to start living up to my true potential.
And if you live up to your full potential, what will that do for you?
That will allow me to start being a happier human being with myself.
Whoa. So if you're happier with yourself, now notice there was a shift in type of chunking up here, and that's a real good shift to occur. So if you're happier with yourself, what'll that do for you?
That will allow me to begin doing the things I really want to do.
And if you do the things you really want to do, that'll do what? What will that do for you?
That will allow me to really start transforming myself and others.
And if you transform yourself and others, that'll make you what?
More joyous and peaceful inside.
Excellent. So this part's highest intention is joyousness and peacefulness.
Right.
Is it?
Yes.
Good. So let's talk to the other part now. This is the other part on the other hand. And what's its highest intention?
Its highest intention is to live up to my fullest potential.
Excellent. And if you do that, what'll that do for you? I mean, assuming you do that, what'll happen there?
If I live up to my full potential, then I'll become somebody larger than my limitations.
And if you do that, you'll be what?
Then I'll be happy.
Really? And what'll happen then? Now, you may not have noticed this, but your hands are actually moving together.
Yeah. Then I'll really begin doing what I really want to do, which is, from a positive point of view, transforming myself and others.
Very good. And if you do that, what'll happen? What will you have? What'll that do for you? And just allow your hands to continue to move together while we ask these questions.
And that'll bring me joy and peace, inner peace.
Excellent. So do these parts realize that they have the same highest intention? Does that surprise them?
Yes, it does.
It does, doesn't it? They're actually surprised by that, huh?
Yes.
Do they notice that they were once part of a larger whole? I mean, as far back as they have to look, weren't they once part of a larger whole?
Yeah.
And I wonder, as you look at this part, as the other part looks at this part, and this part looks at the other part, do each of these parts notice that they have attributes that the other part would like to have?
Yes, I get a sense that they're sharing lots of attributes, but I'm not consciously aware of them. Is that okay?
Sure, you bet. Now let me ask you one other question. Are there any other parts that were once part of that larger whole that would like to come and join in and become part of this parts integration?
Oh, yeah, a lot.
And they'd like to just join in and become whole at the unconscious level?
Yes.
Could they notice that their highest intention is also the same of joy and peace for you as an individual?
Yes.
They could notice that, couldn't they? Excellent. So your hands are moving together rather nicely now, and just allow them to continue to move together. They've moved together, if I were to describe how quickly they've moved together by about 30 to 40% of the width they were apart in the beginning. It actually took us the time to get to the second part before they actually moved together, even though I felt that joy and peace was sort of a high enough level. But we'll talk about that in just a moment, because the hands are continuing to come together. What are you noticing inside, Lori, as the hands come together? I notice a shift in color on your face.
Well, if this makes sense, in my mind, I was thinking of one, then the other, then one, then the other, and then they just kind of like chunked up even to a higher part in my mind, which is a sense of ecstatic peace or a sense of higher ecstasy and joy.
That's excellent. And the hands now have come about 2/3 of the way together from where they originally were, and they're continuing to move. And so you're noticing a sense of ecstatic joy inside yourself as they continue to come together. And just allow that integration to continue, and don't allow them to come together and touch until they're ready to become whole and one and totally complete at the unconscious level.
Now they as my hands are coming together in my mind, they feel like they're already one, because it's like the one part is pleased with itself in a real sense of ecstatic peacefulness.
Oh, that's good. So really the hands are just actualizing what's already happened at the unconscious level, and they've already come together.
Right.
Oh, that's very good. So now they've got like less than an inch and then a half an inch, and then they just go ahead and touch. And that's perfect. And so why don't you take that integrated part right inside and have it merge into the wholeness inside and allow that integration just to complete at the unconscious level. And Lori will do that for a moment. And while she does that, and that integration occurs at the unconscious level, that was very good. While that integration occurs at the unconscious level, and then she'll bring her hands down, or your client will probably bring their hands down when they're ready. Now, the next thing you want to do is you want to do step number 9, is you want to test and future pace the process. So, Lori, let's see. How do you feel about moving ahead on your doctorate and getting your doctorate in clinical hypnotherapy?
Good. Before it felt like there was something in front of me and something behind me, and I just wasn't moving in either direction. So now it feels like more like I'm in the now, and I want to do it more for myself.
So you're partway down the road. Let's go out into the future, and you tell me when you actually get awarded it. So you go out. Generally, there's an award of the doctorates each year at the American Board of Hypnotherapy Convention. So let me think. So maybe not this February, but next February. When you go out to next February, are you getting it?
Yes, that's exactly what popped in my head. I don't know exactly the steps to get there, but that's exactly the feeling of when I'll get it.
So next February. So you're actually going to go out there and do it.
Yeah.
Very good. And it feels doable, right?
Yeah, it does.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you, Lori. Thank you very much. Okay, so that was a demonstration of parts integration. There's a couple of dissociative techniques I want to go over. And while technically these are more in a genre of submodalities, I want to talk a little bit about VK dissociation here, because we've gotten into the section of how do you structure an entire intervention. I felt like it was a little too early to cover that way back at submodalities, so I want to talk for a moment about doing a VK dissociation. How would you do a VK dissociation? And then how would you use timeline therapy, which we'll talk about when we get into timeline therapy, for doing a VK dissociation. Technically, these are submodalities, but again, as I mentioned before, I wanted to cover them here rather than earlier on, because I wanted to make sure we had gotten through the NLP model of change, so that we could cover them at this point. Okay, let's look at page 74, dissociative technique or VK dissociation. The first thing you want to do is establish an anchor for the here and now state. If a person gets stuck associated in the original event, the here and now anchor can be used to return the person to the present state or the present time. And you should also anchor a calm and relaxed state. I want you to know that I have set up, and this is also called a bailout anchor. I also have set up anchors for here and now, and also have set up powerful resource anchors for clients to use during dissociative techniques. And I have found that sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. I think it's real important if you're doing a dissociative technique with a client to remember one thing, and we'll talk about this when you come to take the timeline therapy training. I think a lot of times we worry too much about whether or not clients are associated into negative emotions. Yeah, and you need to know that there are techniques in the world and there are people in the world who actually put people into negative emotions in the past for the purpose of having them abreact to them. In fact, the brand of therapy, which is taught in the Ericksonian techniques in schools of Ericksonian hypnosis, those particular processes actually are called abreaction therapy, where the client goes back into a traumatic memory in the past and abreacts from it. So I don't think you have to worry about associating a client into a memory because it may happen. But I do think you should, if the client does associate into a memory, is to get them out of the memory as quickly as possible. Okay, so step number 2, ask the person to remember the last time the reaction occurred. So it says here, in some cases, timeline therapy techniques may be needed to deal with the root cause, and that's true. Number 3, anchor that state. Then interrupt the state, and then test the anchor. Then number 4, you're going to instruct the person to place the scene on an imaginary television set or movie screen with all the attendant feelings. Then, number 5, tell the person to run the movie to the most traumatic part and then freeze the frame. And then have the person to imagine floating out of his or her body and watch from behind. Watch from behind the chair or a position behind them. Then, step number 6, you want to anchor that dissociated state. And then tell the person to run the scene until they learn something new, something not previously remembered from this perspective. This is this perspective of being dissociated. When the person acknowledges this, and you can continue to step number 9, you can tell the person to talk to the younger self on the screen, saying, I am from your tomorrow, and this is what I've learned. And you can then nurture and comfort the younger self. The person is told to accept the younger self as part of the present experience and to bring the new learning to the present. You can fire the calm, relaxed state anchor as the person comforts the younger self. In fact, they can go down into the memory and actually take the younger them, the younger you. You can say, take the younger you out of the memory and have him or her come with you and comfort them. Step number 9, then you can further solidify the dissociated state by having the person run the movie scene backwards, making the scene smaller and smaller, and you can fade out the contrast until the scene becomes a small dot, and then you can have the small dot spin out into space, and then you can test in future pace. This is a rather nice dissociative technique. You could use this with timeline therapy, or you could use it separately. I think that it really is a good technique to do when you want to dissociate from certain negative emotions in the past or certain negative memories. A couple of caveats, because we're going to be moving into timeline therapy, some timeline therapy techniques here shortly. I think a couple of caveats are important in this sense. I think one of them is really important to talk about at this point is essentially that if we don't work with the root cause, we may not be getting all of the negative emotions out from the past. And so if you're dealing with an ongoing pattern, timeline therapy may be more effective in that sense. It may be more effective to use timeline therapy. A VK dissociation technique is good for specific memories, but it doesn't take into account the entire chain of memories of all of the client's history. And I think when you're doing a VK dissociative technique, you probably ought to be aware of and be careful that you are including all of the possible events in the past for the client to get learnings about, for them to get and release the negative emotions on. Otherwise, the phobia has the possibility, or the negative emotions have the possibility of coming back. And it says down here at the bottom, caution, when removing a phobia, caution should be observed to make sure the fear did not serve a protective function. If the fear does serve as a protective function, then appropriate new learning strategies may have to be installed, or the learnings may need to be held onto. So VK dissociation, or this particular dissociative technique, is a real nice technique. And there have been a number of people in NLP who've made this into a really nice pattern and called it different things. But it really is basically a basic NLP technique that allows the client to dissociate and to really get dissociated in a way which is really useful. So in this tape, we've covered parts integration, and we've covered VK dissociation, and I think those are a couple of really good techniques that are going to lead us now into timeline therapy. So we'll begin tape number 14 with an introduction to timeline therapy. This is the conclusion of program number 13. Please come back and join us for the next one.